Welcome to Unscripted, a podcast with no script by design. We're not following a plan, and that's exactly the point. This show is about whatever's on the minds of your hosts, Larry Lannan and Duncan Giles. We'll dig into what's happening in the world, and just as importantly, what isn't making headlines this week. So with that, let's get started. The conversation could go anywhere because we go wherever the microphones take us. Here's Larry Lannan and Duncan Giles. I'm Lannan, he's Giles, and this is Lannan and Giles Unscripted, and it's November 21st of 2025, so let me welcome in my partner once again, Duncan Giles.
Thanks, Larry. It's always good to be here.
So we are here to talk about a number of things. I want to start off just talking about something you talked about to a great extent toward the end of our last podcast. And that's, what's going on economically. Being a retired guy, I still try to pay attention to what's happening economically. And I'm starting to see a lot of danger signs here. And you alluded to this before. Let me just start with a few things here. Saw some data the other day that says that your expectations of finding a job right now are at the same level as they were during COVID. Now think about that for a minute.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely.
Wage growth has been 3.5%. Now it's below 3% as best it can be measured now. Lenders, people lending money to businesses of all sizes, tightening up their standards. And even on top of that, the demand for loans to begin with for small and large businesses and for consumers is way down. Even consumers are not taking on debt. But on top of that, consumer credit, the delinquency rate is right about 4.5%. That's where it was pre-pandemic, and that was not a good place to be.
Yeah, that's not good fun.
So I want to talk about something. I saw an Associated Press story just today that I think is worth talking about and kind of get your response to it as well. Starting off with this, because there's just so much uncertainty economically at the present time. I think what the AP reporters found when they started checking around with business leaders is that most businesses are now in a no hire, no fire standstill. And that's not a good place to be. But I thought, well, that's okay. Things are kind of in place. Then they went out and looked at some of the major corporations and what they have already announced they're going to do or have already done. I'm going to go through a list, and I'm going to get your reaction once I've gone through this list because it's disturbing. Some of the biggest corporations in America. Let's start with Verizon. They're laying off 13,000 people. General Motors, 1,700 manufacturing jobs just in Michigan and Ohio alone. The Paramount Corporation, that's just been part of a merger with this company called Skydance, they're going to lose 2,000 people. I think they've already laid off 1,000. Amazon, 14,000 corporate jobs are going away. UPS, big company, 48,000 job cuts. How about Target? 1,800 corporate positions. The Nestle company. Nestle has a big factory not too far from where I live. Nestle, 16,000 jobs all around the world. Then there's Lufthansa. That's a big international company.
Yep.
4,000 jobs. ConocoPhillips, big oil company. They're going to lay off a quarter of their workforce. Intel, they had not that long ago 99,000 plus employees. They're down to about 75,000. Microsoft is cutting 9,000. Then there's Procter and Gamble, 7,000. I looked at that list and I thought, it's not all AI. Some of that is related to
Yeah,
artificial intelligence for sure. But Duncan, you can see the economy is moving in a very bad place right now.
absolutely. And you're talking about not being able to get data. If you are, we don't know how reliable it is from the federal government because the federal government is saying, hey, everything is going okay, everything is beautiful. Um, there was a old IT guy that you would remember from our time in the service who used to say everything is wonderful and beautiful.
I
And
remember that guy. Yeah, I do remember.
yeah,
Yeah.
and that's one of the things that I think the administration is trying to do when it's absolutely not true. And from things I'm reading and things you were just stating, a lot of these are white collar middle management jobs that AI is taking some from. So there is an AI impact on things of that nature from things that I've read, anecdotal evidence. But it's a very tough job market out there. It truly is. Um, and like you said, there are some of them that are in, okay, we're not going to hire, but we're not going to fire. Well, we may be doing buyouts or we may be doing restructuring and things of that nature. And people may be losing their jobs in a restructuring, which is the same thing as a layoff. Um, so, it's very tough. It's not going in a good direction. And, that's going to cause, people in the stock market, if you follow that, the leading indicators like the S&P, the Dow, which I don't really follow because it's too narrow, but the S&P and the Russell have been going down because of these numbers, because you're seeing these corporations out there tightening their belts, and they were counting on the Fed to cut interest rates again, and the Fed's like, I'm not sure we want to do that with this unstable of an economy. So there's a lot of things that play together that are all showing bad signs. There's not really any good signs out there, which is extremely troubling for folks looking for work. I know I see it on LinkedIn almost every day. People who've been looking for months have had sent out literally hundreds of resumes, had dozens of interviews, and still haven't been able to find a job because it's definitely a seller's market, so to speak. It's the business's market because they've got so many good qualified candidates out there. And again, I just want to make my pitch lastly for federal employees. The federal employees who have retired or left early because of the designated retirement program, the DRP, or just because of the things that have been going on in the federal government, are great employees to pick up. You hear the myth of federal employees don't do anything. No, federal employees have been able to do a lot with very little for a long, long time, and so they're great hires as well. So it's just a sad situation overall.
Well, and I think you touched on something that we all need to pay attention to because in the past, there's always been an assumption that the Labor Department will give you honest numbers. And when you're at the point where you're not sure that the Labor Department is going to give you honest numbers, and they did put out a report just a couple of days before we record this, which seemed encouraging, showing that there are more jobs out there. But then on the other hand, it showed the unemployment rate going up. So first of all, some of that data is old,
Yeah,
which is, and when the shutdown happened, the Labor Department came out with a very interesting announcement. They flat out said during that shutdown, there's data we will never be able to capture. So it's almost like flying an airplane with a blindfold on.
very apt analogy. And with you're getting from the government now in different places, it's just scary. I go back to the old press conferences that they had during the Vietnam War, where they were doing casualty counts of the enemy and things of that nature. And what did the reporters end up calling it? The 5 o'clock follies, because these numbers were not accurate. They were made up to make that administration look good, so they could continue the that particular war. And that's the thing now. Are we getting accurate numbers or are these alternative facts? We just don't know.
It's interesting you mentioned that because, I worked in the news business in the 70s and got to know a lot of people who either served in the military or were reporters in Vietnam. And when you talk about the 5 o'clock follies, it was almost like there were two sets of journalists in South Vietnam during that war. One was the group of journalists stationed in Saigon. The others were the ones that were out in the field with the
Right.
troops. And the ones that were out in the field with the troops we're getting a whole different story than those reporters who were in Saigon getting these briefings every day. And it was pretty clear because they talked to their colleagues in the field. They knew they were being lied to. And the real sad part about that is they took it out on the military briefers who really wasn't their
Yeah.
fault.
This is the orders they were given.
They were getting, they that's the numbers they had. They got mad at the reporters. Reporters got mad at them, but it was really unfair. It was the top brass that was ordering this to be done, and it got to be a bad situation there between the military and the press, which really should not have happened. But it is an apt analogy, I think, to say that. So I am concerned about the economy. I don't know what the next step will be. I'm just going to make a comment that concerns me about because you and I worked in government as civil servants, and we always took our direction from our political appointees. They made the big decisions at the top.
Yep.
We had two political appointees in the agency where you and I worked. My father worked in the Defense Department. There were, several political appointees like Secretary of Defense, Secretary of
Right.
Army, Navy, and so forth, Air Force. There were more of those because it's a much bigger agency. My father worked within that system and talked to some of these political appointees at times in the work that he did and found that they were competent people. They knew what they were doing. Whatever you think philosophically or whatever your ideology may be, set that aside for a moment. What concerns me now is that the current administration is hiring a lot of people who just do not seem to know how to do the job. And that's what bothers me. Not their political allegiance or their ideology or their fealty for the president. What concerns me is that there's just not enough expertise to do these jobs the right way. And I think when you get into something like a political situation or an international crisis, I think that's where the expertise of the people at the top is needed. And Duncan, I just worry we don't have that right now.
I think you're absolutely correct. I'll give a great, for instance, is the Comey indictment that is currently falling apart. It's like nothing else I've ever seen. I'm not a lawyer, but I've done a lot of legal work, as you have, that type of thing, legal adjacent, let's call it. And to hear how some of the things went down, it's like, no, 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 no. That's just no. That's that's not the way this works. That's not the way any of this works. And it's because of the fact that the people that were appointed in political system were, and again, every administration is going to appoint people who are loyal to their party. That's understood. But there's also a basic thing that they have to be qualified to do the job. And if you're not qualified, why in the heck would you put them in these types of positions? And it can't just be blind loyalty. And I think your point is very well taken
Duncan,
about
you
that.
you and I worked for an agency where certain employees where we worked were assigned to grand jury duty. I'm sure you
Yep.
remember that.
Yep.
And I think this happened before you actually came to the service because I'd been there a little bit longer than you, and it got to the point where the people who were designated to go on to duty with the grand jury, their managers had no way to evaluate them
Exactly so.
because the
Yep.
managers were not, I mean, these were totally secret proceedings by law and could not be revealed even to the manager of the employee. The employee was sworn to secrecy, and so the manager could not even know what the employee is doing. Finally, it took several years to figure this out, but I think it was Department of Justice. One of their managers then would write some kind of a evaluative document to the
Exactly.
immediate manager of the employee who was dead. So at least there was a way to evaluate, and the employee wasn't penalized for a very important piece of duty being assigned to grand jury duty.
I had to have that exact discussion with a newer manager who had an employee who was a longtime grand jury agent, and explain to them that no, they're not going to know anything that the person does, that they're going to need the folks from justice to give them some documentation so they can base their appraisal on that. But no, they're not going to know specific cases or anything of that nature. And that's the way it should be. And, again, we go back to, whether you are in uniform or a federal civil servant, you take an oath to the Constitution of the United States, not to any political figure, not to any political party, to the Constitution of the United States. When we do our work, there should be political blinders on. You shouldn't care whether somebody's a Republican, Democrat, Libertarian, Druid, whatever it is. That you should be just doing it on the facts, on the law. And unfortunately, I think we're losing a lot of that.
Okay, you're going to have to explain Druid.
I always use Druid as a example. When this is a couple of decades ago, my ex-wife was in the hospital for surgery for a gallbladder type thing, and a nun came in because my ex was Catholic, and was talking to her a little bit, and the nun turned to me and goes, "Are you a Catholic also, my son?" I said, me being the type of person I am, said, "No, ma'am, I'm a Druid. I worship trees." That nun gave me 1,000-yard stare. So now I always use Druids as an example.
Well, as you all know, I have lots of personal experience with nuns, so
Yes.
I'm trying to figure that out. Okay, Duncan, as we do in each of our podcasts, I've got a few stories that did not make the mainstream media, and I'd like to pass those along, get your reaction to them. The first one, we go all the way to France. It's a small town in France. Their town council delivered some good news to a homeowner. CBS News got this story. This man in France can keep, and get this, $800,000 worth of gold bars that he found in a swimming pool in his backyard when he bought this house. The gold was in plastic bags. Well, the man, of course, saw this when he first bought the house, saw this and alerted the authorities that he found all this. Well, the police, they had to do an investigation. And the way the law works in France, if you discover something like this and it's determined not to have been stolen, you get to keep it. This guy has $8,000 worth of gold.
I'm wondering what happened with the previous homeowner, how they acquired that much gold, why they, or if they had passed, why their heirs didn't take a close look at the pool to figure out what might be there.
So I guess I should clarify this. They were digging for a pool. The pool wasn't there when they bought the house.
Okay.
They had to dig into the ground. Of course, the first thing you think about when somebody has buried gold is that they stole. That's the first thing you'd think. Apparently, they decided that was better than putting it into a safety deposit box.
Well, as you and I both know, it doesn't matter what country you're in. There are certain people that do not trust banks, do not trust currency, things of that nature. So I wouldn't say it's common to bury stuff in the backyard, but I've known people who have done exactly that. Not $800,000 worth of gold, which is still a lot of weight, I would imagine.
Even though I never became a paralegal, I actually took paralegals training. So I was thinking about doing that when I was kind of between jobs. And I'll never forget this lawyer that taught one of our classes, very experienced man. He had probated tons of estates and in his history of practicing law. And he was teaching us how to find assets when somebody dies. He says the first place you want to look is in the freezer. He said, you
Yep.
look in the freezer because if you find something wrapped up in the white material that butchers use to store meat, look there first, unwrap it. You're probably going to find money there.
That's a good place. And I was flashing to a crime that happened when we were younger. Marjorie Jackson, the Marjorie Jackson murder, where somebody went into their house, group went into their house because they had heard she had put money in the walls because she didn't trust banks. So there are people that do those types of things.
That was an odd thing, and that I kind of know a little bit about that because it was that criminal case that ended up in Martinsville while I was working there. A guy named Howard Willard was the one who was charged with that, and the story was strange because there was a very popular grocery chain in the Indianapolis area called Standard Grocery, and she was an heir to that fortune. Well, even though they had been sold years ago, she still had all this money. And you're right, the rumors get around the criminal world when you
Yeah.
think somebody is stashing a lot of cash in their home. And what ended up happening there is they tried to cover their crime by starting a fire, and that almost never ends up well for the police, which it didn't in this case. These guys all ended up getting caught, and it was a pretty sordid affair. But yeah, that was when you have money stat. And I have to tell you, my parents were grandparents. I'm sorry, they my grandparents. Should say my grandparents suffered through the Depression, but they knew a lot of people who stuffed cash in their mattresses.
Yep. That was a popular thing.
Once the banks went down and people couldn't get their money, and way before we had insurance, for bank accounts, people just did not trust the banks, and you can understand why when you go through something like that. Let's move on to another story. This one comes out of Windsor, Connecticut. Sometimes you can say a police officer solves a crime with great investigative skills. Did not exactly happen in this case. This comes from a TV station, WFSB TV. They report Andrew Scott Lampkin, 42 years old, and Jonathan Riopel, who's 46, both from Connecticut, allegedly removed a sign for I-91, the Interstate 91, took the sign down, strapped it to the bed of a pickup truck at 8:30 in the morning on November 5th. Guess what? They found him. The thieves were charged with third-degree larceny, reckless use of a highway by a pedestrian, and improper parking on a highway because they had to park on the highway to steal the sign. And they put the sign on their truck. So it wasn't exactly hard to find the thieves in this particular case.
That sounds like they missed their chance to be brain surgeons or nuclear physicists right there. Those are some sharp guys. So this will be fun. And I am sure that alcohol was not involved in the plan of that whatsoever.
Well, we don't know about that being a charge, but who knows? I mean,
Hold my beer. I'm
uh,
going to do this.
the best one is that so they just weren't too bright and go down from there. Let's go to Scotland now, Glasgow, Scotland. There's a city councillor there named Hanif Raja. He dropped into a virtual planning meeting for the town, for the city council, whatever. Uh, he Again, a virtual meeting. I guess he must have had his phone with him, but he forgot to turn off his camera when he went into the bathroom. Now, the BBC had this story. They reported that another counselor got on the horn and said, "Mr. Raja, are you aware that your camera is live?" Prompting him to explain, "Well, I am diabetic and I need several comfort breaks." Comfort breaks. I haven't heard it quite described that way, but the button was pressed and I just didn't notice. But I guess they they actually removed the live stream and before they uploaded it, they did edit that out. But it did go out live, unfortunately for this poor guy.
Yeah, that sounds like that. I flashed two things there during your story. The first one was, the Naked Gun movie where, he's still mic'd up and goes into the bathroom, and it plays all over the hall. So that was a very poor impression of the Naked Gun. That's not something you want to do. And your comfort break, I had a person in my training class when I first started with the service, and I've used this phrase ever since I heard him use it. what if I need to have a biological interlude? A biological interlude because of certain medical conditions. So I that's what I'll tell Kim sometimes, like, oh, stop. I need to, have a biological interlude, just a moment, and I'll be back in a few.
I like that. Comfort breaks, and I think the interlude may be a little bit better. I kind of like that better. Yeah, that's how can I do remember I worked for TurboTax one tax season to do their telephone help that they had. Now they do it live on on video. I could never do that. I mean, I'm sorry. I just being on live
You'd be
talking.
great at that.
I might be great at it, but I don't think it would be something I would enjoy doing, talking to people
Well,
video.
there's that.
Oh yeah, because then you got to dress up and all that. I mean, you're on the phone, you can dress any way you want. But
And you can't hide it when you're rolling your eyes at some of the questions.
well, we've done that on occasion. Because working in toll free is hard work. You and I both did that at one time. But I must say that we took a virtual training class. When we took our training, we had to learn how to use their systems and all that. We took some tax law training, but most all of us had certification either as enrolled agents or CPAs. But so this was mostly how to use their systems and how to deal with their
Right.
systems and apply the law that way. But we would take a break and again, it was my phone, it wasn't video, but there was one fellow, Duncan, who did not turn his did not turn his mic off. And it was pretty embarrassing. It was worse than Naked Gun, let's put it that way.
Oh, yeah, that's not good.
I'm gonna go
I know exactly where you're headed, and that's not good.
and we're gonna stop right there. Uh, I'm going to go closer to home for you and I. This is a police report from Purdue University from WLFI TV there. They grappled with a sticky situation on campus. This was November 5th. Officers received calls about a man walking around the campus covered from head to toe in peanut butter. Now, the witnesses, get this is how a university thinks of things. Witnesses were concerned about safety issues for people with peanut butter allergies. That was the first thing they thought about. However, the,
Okay.
I, the first thing I thought of was what the investigators are unsure about what they call the PB man. They don't know whether he's a student or not, but they say it's a very likelihood that this was a hazing prank.
All I was flashing to was fraternity initiation, right there, that type of thing.
And Indiana University, south of Purdue, are two big universities in Indiana, are public universities, are Purdue and Indiana. Indiana University, they shut down all activity for for all the fraternities because the hazing was getting out
Yep.
of hand. Which hazing is a tradition, but you can really go into some. I've heard some stories that would scare you to death. That's like, okay, fraternity, forget it. I'll just be an independent. Thank you very
Yeah.
much.
Thank you very much. Exactly.
Well, Duncan, that's about our time's about up this time. Any final thoughts before we go?
Yeah, I just want to had a great experience this week. Kim and I went to the same restaurant. It's one of our favorite restaurants. I'll give them a plug. Vito Provolone's on the south side. Wonderful Italian food. Uh, we had our first date there and went back on Wednesday. And that was exactly 4 years from our first in person date. We had talked a lot on the phone, but that was our first in person date. And just, it was just a really nice experience. Say, hey, 4 years ago, we were there and now we're here. And it's such a great thing to have. And I am just so very lucky. So just wanted to relay that, a great experience.
Yeah, and did not you and I have dinner there one time?
Yep, it is. Like I said, it's great food, great service, and that's Kim and my. We look at it as our special place type thing.
Yes, and you have to get there early because it gets very crowded for that very.
Unless you got a reservation. Yep.
The food there is great. I have to say that. I enjoyed that dinner very much. So one quick thing. Our next podcast will be a week from today. It'll be the day after Thanksgiving. So we do want to wish everybody a happy Thanksgiving. And if you know of someone who maybe doesn't have a place to go, maybe their family's out of town or they don't have close family, and you know someone like that, invite them to come to your family
Absolutely.
gathering. I think that's something we all need to keep in mind. There are always people we know, and they don't always let us know. But if you find out that's the case, make sure they've got somebody to hang with on Thanksgiving Day. It's a tough day to be by yourself. Duncan Giles, thank you again. If all goes well, again, we'll be back in another week with another edition of Lannan and Giles Unscripted. We have one ask for you as the audience. Like and subscribe to this podcast. We appreciate it. Duncan and Larry will be back soon with another episode. In the meantime, this is Unscripted.